Welcome to week 9. So now we're going to continue by looking at some advanced visualization libraries. We're going to look at Seaborn and Plotly. Now Seaborn and Plotly interact very well with MatPlotLib, so we've been using a lot of MatPlotLib to this point. We're going to expand your experience to also get a little bit deeper into Seaborn and a little bit deeper into the new Plotly library. So let me start off first off by installing the libraries. It's going to be a pip install. Again, let's start with Seaborn, for instance. Here's an excellent web page right here, seaborn.pydata.org. We'll get you to that. And the installation instructions are fairly straightforward. Pip install Seaborn. Now, if you're using a Conda environment, then it would be a Conda install. If you're in obviously on your Jupyter notebooks, it would be similar as well. This is an interesting site because you can also kind of see the gallery of all the different types of charts. So if you wanted to do a violin plot, for instance, if you're looking at box plots, if you're looking at histograms, to even more advanced things like pair grids, joint grids, pair plots, again, cluster maps. We're looking at that typically with natural language processing, line plots, interactive line plots, all kinds of different versions here. So it gives you quite an example here. And let's just take the violin plot, for instance. It gives you an example of the code that you'd use in order to use it within Seaborn. So you're going to see this. We'll get into this a little bit in the demonstration. But first of all, that was Seaborn. The next library is going to be Plotly. So if you were in the R course, you probably have experienced Plotly too as well. Plotly has less of kind of some of the flexibility of what you just saw within Seaborn, but again, very straightforward. So if you wanted to do a pie chart, for instance, you can see here is kind of the calling matrix for Plotly. And installation is relatively straightforward as well too. You'd simply do a pip install Plotly, and that'll get you the application. Okay. So let's go into the demonstrations example here for this week. Let me scroll up. We're going to apply the knowledge of advanced data visualizations using some of the additional libraries which I've just mentioned. So for the demonstration here, I'm going to show you a couple things. First of all, using the iris dataset, I'm going to create a bar plot using Seaborn to visualize the count of the number of flowers in each species, and I'll label the X and Y axis. I'm going to use Plotly to create an interactive scatter plot to visualize the relationship between sepal length and sepal width of the flowers, and including tooltips. I'm going to create a histogram using MatPlotLib and visualize the distribution of petal lengths in the iris dataset, customize bin size, color, transparency of the bars. I'm going to use Seaborn to create a box plot comparing the distribution of petal widths across different species and the iris dataset. I'm going to create a line plot using Plotly to display the trend of petals, widths, and different species in the dataset. I'm going to add markers to the data points and include a title. I'm going to use MatPlotLib to create a stacked area plot to visualize the contributions of different species. Now again, this is the iris data set, so it's not going to have very much to see in there, but it'll give you an example of how you can make the call. It has customized colors, legend, and title as well, and then a heat map using Seaborn to visualize the correlation matrix. So we've seen heat maps in other weeks too as well. This is bread and butter. This is something you're going to use constantly inside of Python visualizations. So the result, the deliverable is going to be this this Jupyter notebook in front of you, and our grading criteria has not changed. So first of all, for Seaborn, got to make sure you use the library, the Seaborn library, loading it here, and then directly loading the iris data set from Seaborn. Simply using count plot will create the bar plot that we're looking for right here. There's other parameters that you can feed to it, but then it starts to get into a combination of using MatPlotLib and Seaborn. So for this example, I just wanted to show you a standard bar plot using Seaborn. Next question here, or the next example, is going to be using Plotly. So Plotly is new to you. Plotly typically will be px, and we would use plotly.express. So if you've loaded the Plotly library correctly, that import should work. Here I'm going to go ahead and load the iris data set. Within Plotly, it's got a function called iris where you can load that data set. And then you'd use fig for the figure that you're going to actually display. So in this case here, I'm going to create a scatter plot. The data set is going to be the iris, X and Y labels here, the color here, and the hover data over petal width and petal length. I'm going to add tooltips, so the hover template of the tooltips, and you can see that the code is written here. And I'm also going to update the layout to include sepal width, sepal length, and the relationship between sepal lengths. And then you have to make sure that you do this show at the end, very similar to MatPlotLib. And here you go. Now you can see that this is interactive, so as you float over the top of an individual element, you can see the more detailed data of it. So if you can compare and contrast what you saw previously with MatPlotLib and what you have available here in Plotly, it's quite a bit of additional functionality. You've also got things like taking screenshots, download, you can do a box select, you can do a lasso select, you can auto scale. There's all kinds of interesting things you can do with it here. So that's also available to you within the notebook. Next is going to be creating a histogram in MatPlotLib to visualize the distribution. So very similar, MatPlotLib, we're going to do plot.hist, and I'm going to give the parameters the iris data set, filtering out the petal length. I'm going to make 10 bins. I'm going to change the color to sky blue and the alpha of 08. Add these labels, add the title, and then do a show. Here you've got your distribution. Next, we're going to use Seaborn to create a box plot to compare the distribution of petal widths across different species in the iris data set. So continuing the same load, doing a box plot. The plot will get you here. Now, in addition, this is an example of using MatPlotLib to add additional functionality to it. So here I've added the additional functionality of some labels on top of it and then done the show here. Here is your box plot. So obviously this is quite helpful if you're looking for ranges or looking for outliers. You can see that fairly quickly. Create a line. Next one is going to be creating a line plot using Plotly to display the trend of petal widths over the different species. Again, remember, this is the iris data set, so it's going to be a little bit limited in the visualization. But we're going to use a similar type thing. We're going to use the line, though. And in the line, we're going to use X and Y is the species ID, the petal width, and the species for the color. Markers equal true, and then a title on top of it. So all within that one call. Then we turn around and we do a show. And here is your plot. So as you can see very quickly, using Plotly and using Seaborn, you're going to get a little bit more advanced type visualizations that it can really be of value to you. So kind of think about that as you're looking through which of the 3 libraries to select. Next is going to be the MatPlotLib to create a stacked area to visualize the different species. So here we're going to subset the iris data set just on the species and do value counts on it. That we're going to store into value counts, or species counts. Then what we're going to do is we're going to create a stack plot, and so that's going to have the species count .index, the species count .values, and the labels is going to be the species index. Set up some labels, set up a title, set up a legend up in the upper left-hand corner, and then do a plot show. Again, because it's the iris data set, not very interesting as far as a plot, but it gives you the general call syntax which you could use. And then finally the heat map. So here I'm going to use the combination of Seaborn and MatPlotLib because I want to do a couple of things to it. First of all, extracting the numerical columns. Next, I'm going to assign that to the iris numerical. I'm going to build a correlation matrix by using the core function right here. That's going to generate the correlation matrix, which you see here. Then turn around and set my figure up. I'm going to put a figure size of 8 by 6. I'm going to turn around and call the heat map function using the correlation matrix and using the mapping of cool warm. Put a title on top of it, do the plot show, and you can see here. So that gives you kind of a step-by-step over some of the major items. Again, I would say refer back to the two website pages which I've given you, whether you're going to be talking about Seaborn or whether you're going to be talking about Plotly. There's all kinds of visualizations which you can do here. There's all kinds that you may be interested in. Consider just playing around, testing through a couple of these other types examples, because a lot of times once you can get the data loaded, like once the data is loaded, then actually turning around and choosing a different graph is simply updating the call to the actual plot. Same with Plotly. Plotly can do some pretty interesting things too as well. And so you might want to try playing around with a couple of the examples here to kind of get ideas, such as using images, for instance. Okay, for the assignment. So for the assignment, you're going to use the Titanic data set. And using the Titanic data set, you're going to do a series of very similar type steps. You're going to create a bar plot using Seaborn, and they'll give you the specific parameters there. You're going to use Plotly to create an interactive scatter plot. You're going to create a histogram using MatPlotLib. You're going to use Seaborn to create a box plot. You're going to use Plotly to display the survival rate of passengers based on their age. You're going to use MatPlotLib to create a stacked bar plot to visualize the survival count of the passengers. And finally, you're going to create a heat map using Seaborn to visualize the correlation metrics of numerical values on the Titanic data set. So similar to the introduction script, the demonstration script, but obviously using a different data set. So please pay attention to that specific part. Do not turn in one with the Iris data set or you will not get points. So just modify this notebook to include the Python code as well as any documentation and submit that as your response. And the same grading criteria still stands from our previous weeks. Your submission here goes right here, so you'll just simply go and you'll add your code either in Visual Studio Code or in Jupyter Labs, Jupyter Notebooks. Regardless, that's the Jupyter Notebook is what you turn in as the final submission. So if you have any questions, please reach out on the discussion forums, reach out during office hours or to your instructor directly. Otherwise, have a good one. Thank you.